Now then, Labour's leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for the resignation of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, saying that Britain deserves better after they were fined by the police for breaking lockdown rules in 2020.
The Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves joins us from Salford. A very good morning to you. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there is obviously a lot of anger, and politically speaking, of course, it's clear why you would want both of them to resign. But you would expect, I suppose, for everybody to think the same thing, but they don't, do they? Lots of people this morning may go, yes, OK, it happened, wasn't very clever, wasn't very good, but as the Daily Mail says this morning, there's a war on. We've heard inflation is at 7% now. Are there more important things that we should all be talking about than a couple of £50 fines?
I think that the most powerful argument comes from those who have made huge sacrifices during the pandemic. A friend of mine lost her husband during the pandemic. She was at the funeral alone. She didn't have anyone to hold her hand. She did that because they were the rules, and she wanted to protect her family. She wanted to protect her friends and her community. Millions of people around the country made huge sacrifices, heartbreaking sacrifices. And the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, those at the top making the rules, didn't do that. And then they lied, and they lied about the lies, and they lied again. And they no longer have the authority to govern. And so whether it is dealing with the pandemic or indeed whether it is focusing on those issues like the cost of living and Ukraine, we need fresh leadership, because this government are now mired in this saga of lies and deception and rule-breaking, and they no longer are fit to govern.
But the reality is, isn't it, that you're sort of whistling in the wind here, aren't you? Because Boris Johnson and certainly Rishi Sunak, they're not going anywhere, are they?
Well, they've made it very clear that they plan to stay. In the end, it is, with a Conservative majority of 80, it's going to be up to Conservative MPs whether they listen to their constituents or whether they do, as they sadly usually do, and listen to what Boris Johnson tells them to do. Because I don't think their constituents, the Conservative MPs' constituents, are different from mine. And I think that people up and down the country are disgusted, frankly, that at a time when, as a country and individually, we've made such sacrifices in the national interest, that those at the top making the rules broke the rules, and we now know that because of a massive police investigation and those fines having been issued. We've never been in a situation like this before, when a Prime Minister has been found to have broken the law whilst in office. And if this is not reason for him to go, then frankly, Richard, I just don't know what is.
Well, it's interesting. You know, one of the Tory defence sort of tweets that came out was an attack on the previous record of Labour MPs in terms of saying Liam Byrne, an MP, a Labour MP, didn't resign when he was fined for £100 for using his phone whilst driving. This tweet by Brendan Clark-Smith goes on. Harriet Smith didn't resign when she was caught speeding in 2007, 2003, when she was banned from driving whilst Solicitor General. Fined again in 2010. She didn't resign at any of those points. Baroness Scotland received a £5,000 penalty notice for hiring an illegal worker. Didn't resign. Why are the rules on resignation different for the Tory party than they are for the Labour Party?
I think that anybody breaks the rules should face the consequences of the law. I think what is unique about this situation...
Well, they have faced the consequences of the law, haven't they? Let's be clear. They have... Well, the police have investigated and they've...
So I think there are... Yeah. So I think the big difference here is that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor lied to Parliament. They lied about ever having attended parties. You'll remember that, first of all, the Prime Minister said the rules were obeyed at all times. And then he said maybe the rules were broken, but I wasn't there. And then he accepted that he was there, but he didn't know that he was breaking the rules. Time and time again, the Prime Minister has lied to the country and lied to Parliament, and the Chancellor has done the same. So it is not just the rule breaking, but I think that is the worst of it. It is the fact that they have lied and lied again to the people. And this is at a time when people, as I say, were making huge sacrifices because they knew it was the right thing to do. And it now turns out that the very people at the top of government making these rules for everybody else didn't think that they applied to them.
All right, can I ask you...
I don't think that we can have a situation where there's one set of rules for one group of people and another for everybody else.
Can I ask you, what is Labour's strategy going to be? I mean, these are the shots in your locker that are being fired off this morning, and Keir Starmer said what he said yesterday, and you're making these statements now. It is reasonably likely, it's a reasonable assumption, to think that the Prime Minister may well be fined again and again and again, because there are more parties being investigated. What will Labour's, the opposition's strategy be if and when that happens?
Well, look, I think in the end you've got to call for what you think is right. And Keir Starmer, myself and the Labour Party, we feel that it is right now that the Prime Minister goes. The investigations have taken place, the fines have been issued. It is now clear that the Prime Minister has lied to the country and lied to Parliament. It is clear that he didn't abide by the rules that millions of people abided by. And in the end, though, in terms of whether he stays or goes, that is a choice that only him and his party can make, because the Conservatives have got a majority of 80 in Parliament. And so that is on them, really, and their conscience. Will they listen to their constituents that have made those sacrifices, or will they do what the party whip says? But in the end, I think that you've got to call for what you think is the right thing to do. And I think the right thing for the country now is for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to resign, because Britain deserves better than the leadership we've got today. And
it's interesting, isn't it? Because morally, of course, that's the point of view that lots and lots of people have. The Ministerial Code of Conduct is not set in stone. It's not law. It is just a code. And indeed, we were discovering this morning on the Institute for Government, they say that the Ministerial Code and who investigates whether the Prime Minister lied is entirely at the Prime Minister's discretion, according to the Institute of Government. So it makes a slight mockery of the code itself. But I think from a political point of view, surely doesn't it just serve Labour better if there's a general election next year that you have a slightly wonky Prime Minister and a tarnished Chancellor with the tax saga, with this now, to keep them in place? Because if they do resign, say if they got the 15% of Tory backbenchers to send those letters and there was a vote of no confidence, or they had a moment of conscience and they'd resign themselves, you'd get somebody strong and new in, Liz Truss or Michael Gove or somebody else who could say, it wasn't me, Gov, that was in the old guard, it's us now. It would make it much harder, wouldn't it, for Labour to be that kind of Tory government?
I think this is bigger than the party politics. This is about what is right for the country. And so many people have sacrificed so much, not being there for the birth of their baby, not being there for the funeral of a loved one, not being able to hold the hand of somebody in a care home or in a hospital when they died. And if the Prime Minister can't see how deeply offensive it is to people who have made those sacrifices to then learn that he wasn't even sticking by the very basic rules of not having parties and not having gatherings, then you know, he's just not fit to govern. And that is the judgment that I think a lot of the country, and certainly Keir Starmer and myself, have come to.
Rachel Reeves, thank you very much for your time this morning, but we have to leave it there because we have some breaking news.